The moment I stepped into the house, a suffocating silence enveloped me. It wasn't the kind of quiet that brings peace, it was the kind that sends a chill down your spine, like a warning. The door creaked as I pushed it open, and the air seemed thick with an unspoken tension. I expected to hear the usual hum of the refrigerator, the distant sounds of city traffic, maybe even the soft purr of the cat. But instead, there was nothing. Not a sound. Just that eerie, unnatural stillness that only happens when something is terribly wrong. I glanced around the hallway, my pulse quickening as I took in the disorder. The papers I'd left neatly stacked on the coffee table were now scattered across the floor, some ripped, others just tossed aside like they meant nothing. My heart raced as I stepped further into the living room. Furniture was overturned. Pillows were slashed open. I felt the prickle of dread crawling up my neck as I scanned the room, trying to make sense of it. But what I noticed first wasn't the wreckage, it was the safe. Wide open. Empty. I stood there, frozen for a moment, my breath catching in my chest. The safe had never been easy to open. It held the last remnants of my grandmother's legacy, her letters, family heirlooms, everything that tied me to her. The only thing in the world I truly cared about. I dialed David's number, my fingers trembling as I held the phone to my ear. 1 ring. 2 rings. I could already feel the panic rising in my throat. No answer. Just voicemail. I hung up and dialed again, this time with urgency. David, someone broke in. The safe is open. Call me back. Now. The tension in the air grew thicker as I moved through the wreckage, my mind racing, piecing things together. The shattered photo frames. The drawers pulled out, their contents dumped carelessly onto the floor. I felt the sting of tears welling up, but I fought them back. This wasn't just a robbery. This was personal. They'd been looking for something, and they knew exactly where to find it. I stopped dead in my tracks as I noticed something on the floor. A small scrap of paper. I bent down to pick it up, my heart hammering in my chest as I saw what it was, a receipt from a hardware store. It was dated 3 days ago, just before I left. And on it, a line that caught my breath, duplicate key. I stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of it, but the answer was already clear. Evelyn. My mother-in-law. She was the only one who knew where I kept that spare key. I stumbled back, my mind racing with one crushing thought: David had given her the key. Of course he had. She'd been planning this for months. And now, everything that mattered to me was gone. I picked up the phone again, my hands shaking as I dialed his number, voice cold, barely able to hold the anger back. Did you give her a key? My voice cracked, and I could hear his hesitation on the other end. I didn't think you'd mind, he muttered, his words just as weak as his excuse. My heart sank into my stomach. You didn't think. That was the problem, wasn't it? He never thought. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. I'll be over there soon. And David, you tell your mother to prepare for war. As I hung up, I stood in the middle of the chaos. My home. My sanctuary. Torn apart by the very people who were supposed to protect it. They thought they could break me, bend me to their will like they had with everyone else in their lives. But what they didn't realize was that they had just made a fatal mistake. I wasn't the same woman they could control anymore. I would make them regret this. I would make them pay. And so, the real game began. I turned on my heels, the anger and determination burning inside me, a fire that had been smoldering for years but was now ready to explode. It was time to show them just how wrong they were to mess with me. I wouldn't just get back what was mine, I was going to destroy everything they held dear. I slammed the phone down, the sound of it hitting the table ringing in my ears. My heart was pounding, each beat thudding in my chest like a war drum. I had to go. I had to face them. I couldn't stand the thought of them getting away with this, with anything. But I knew the moment I stepped into that house, it would all change. David would be there. Evelyn would be there. And I had no idea what I would find waiting for me. My hands trembled as I started my car and pulled out of the driveway. The road ahead was a blur, my mind focused on one thing, getting answers. And then, doing something with them. I didn't know exactly what that would look like yet, but I would figure it out when the time came. The air felt colder the closer I got to their house, the familiar route suddenly feeling foreign, like I was heading into enemy territory. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw the familiar sight of Evelyn's pristine lawn, perfectly manicured as always. But the perfection was a lie. A mask she wore to hide the rot beneath. I could feel the weight of it pressing against me. As I walked to the front door, my mind raced with 1,000 possibilities, each one darker than the last. The door opened before I had a chance to knock. There she was, Evelyn, standing in front of me with that smile, the one she always wore when she was about to pull one of her manipulative tricks. It was too calm. Too practiced. "Sarah," she said, her voice dripping with sweetness, but I could hear the sharp edge beneath it. "What a surprise. I didn't expect you back so soon." She stepped aside to let me in, but I didn't move. "I need to talk to you," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Where's David?" Her smile faltered, just for a second, but then it was back, full force. "David's busy. He's upstairs. We were just going through some family things." I didn't need her to finish the sentence. I already knew what she meant. She was playing her game again. The game where she made everyone think she was the matriarch, the one who had control over everything, even the most intimate details of my life. I stepped inside, every inch of my body screaming for me to stay calm. I couldn't let her see how much she had already affected me. The house was as perfect as I remembered, the air thick with the scent of expensive candles and polished wood. Everything was in place, untouched by the chaos that had consumed my own home. Evelyn led me into the living room, where David sat on the couch, his face a mixture of guilt and frustration. He wasn't looking at me, his eyes were fixed on the floor, like he was trying to avoid the inevitable confrontation. I could feel the weight of his silence, his unwillingness to stand up for me, for us. I didn't waste any time. "Did you give your mother a key to our house?" I demanded, my eyes never leaving David's face. David's gaze snapped up to meet mine, and for a brief moment, I saw something in his eyes, fear, maybe, or shame. But it was gone in an instant. He shifted uncomfortably, not answering right away. Evelyn, standing by his side, placed a hand on his shoulder as if to comfort him, but I saw it for what it was, a possessive gesture, the kind that made it clear who held the power in this family. "She just wanted to look through some old albums," Evelyn said, her tone still sugary sweet but heavy with implication. "You know, family history. Nothing serious." I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me. "Nothing serious?" I repeated, my voice sharp. "Are you kidding me? You went through my things. You stole what was mine." Evelyn didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned in, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You're overreacting, Sarah. Nothing was stolen. We were just trying to preserve family memories. You should understand that. Family is important, dear." Her words were meant to cut, meant to remind me of my place in their world, a world where I would always be the outsider. But I wasn't going to let her control me any longer. I reached into my bag and pulled out the receipt from the hardware store, the one that had been hidden under the pile of papers in my living room. "You think I don't know what you've been up to?" I said, tossing the receipt onto the coffee table in front of him. "You made a copy of the key 3 days ago. Don't lie to me." For a split second, I saw it. A flicker of something in Evelyn's eyes, surprise? Guilt? Then it was gone, replaced by a mask of indifference. But it was too late. I had already won. David looked from the receipt to his mother, and for the first time in years, I saw him hesitate. I didn't wait for him to speak. "Tell me, David," I said, my voice a little softer but no less firm. "Did you give her permission to break into my life like this?" David opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He was trapped. And Evelyn, for all her power, was powerless now. She had underestimated me. She had thought she could break me, make me bow to her will like she did with everyone else. But I was done playing that game. I turned to leave, but I stopped at the door, looking back over my shoulder. "This isn't over," I said, my voice steady. "You and your mother think you can manipulate everyone around you, but I'm not like the rest. I'm done being your pawn." I stepped out of the house, the weight of the confrontation still heavy on my shoulders, but a sense of power surged through me. I didn't need to wait for David to make up his mind. I would do what needed to be done. I would make sure they faced the consequences for their actions. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't going to let them win. And I would make them regret the day they decided to play their games with me. I walked out of the house, but the weight of what had just happened sat heavy in my chest. The door clicked shut behind me, but I didn't feel the relief I thought I would. Instead, I felt a growing fire inside me, one that burned with a mix of anger and determination. Evelyn had crossed a line, but I knew it wasn't just about the letters, or the safe. It was about control. About manipulation. About everything she had tried to take from me. I got into my car and started the engine, not knowing exactly where I was going but knowing I couldn't sit still. I needed to think. I needed a plan. The silence in my car was deafening, broken only by the hum of the engine as I drove aimlessly, my mind racing. I thought about everything that had led up to this moment: David, his weakness, his blind devotion to his mother, the way he had always chosen her over me. The way he stood there, silent, when I confronted him. It was clear to me now that he was never going to change. And maybe, just maybe, that was for the best. I pulled over on the side of the road, taking a deep breath and grabbing my phone. Michael had been my rock through all of this. The only person who had listened to me when I felt like I was drowning in this toxic family dynamic. I needed to talk to him. I needed his help. "Michael, it's me," I said when he picked up on the first ring. "I need your help. They're not going to stop. Evelyn won't stop. She thinks she can get away with this." "Sarah, what's happened?" His voice was steady, calm, exactly what I needed right now. "They broke into my house. They took the letters. The things that mattered most to me. And I know it wasn't just about the letters. It's about control. Evelyn is trying to take everything I have, everything that's mine. And David, God, David, he doesn't even see it." I could hear the pause on the other end of the line, and then Michael spoke, his tone a little softer. "I know how hard this is for you. But you're not alone in this. We'll figure it out. I need to get them back. I need to make them pay. But I don't just want the letters. I want them to understand that they can't do this to me anymore." "All right," Michael said, a hint of resolve in his voice. "We'll need a plan. But Sarah, you have to be careful. People like them, when they're cornered, they're dangerous." His words rang in my ears, but I couldn't back down now. I had been living under their control for too long. It was time to turn the tables. "I know," I said, my voice steady. "That's why I need you to help me set everything up. I need cameras. I need a way to catch them in the act. I need to make sure they never pull something like this again." Michael agreed without hesitation. We hung up, and I drove home, my thoughts swirling with plans and ideas. I had to act fast, before they realized I was onto them. I had to be smarter than Evelyn. I had to be one step ahead. The next few days were a blur of activity. Michael came over to install a security system at my house, hidden cameras in every room, motion sensors around the property. I was going to catch them in the act. I was going to expose Evelyn for who she really was. But even as I set my trap, a small part of me felt the weight of what I was doing. Was I going too far? Was this really the only way to get justice? It didn't matter. What they had done to me was unforgivable. I had already spent too many years trying to please them, trying to live up to their expectations. It was time to stop being the victim. It was time to fight back. On the fourth day, I got the call I had been waiting for. The cameras were ready. The system was up and running. I just had to wait for them to make their move. And I knew they would. They were too arrogant, too sure of themselves to think I could ever catch them. I spent the day pacing around the house, unable to focus on anything but the coming confrontation. When the time finally came, I was ready. I had watched Evelyn long enough to know her patterns. She wouldn't be able to resist. It was almost like she had a sixth sense when it came to getting what she wanted, and she would come for it. It was only a matter of time. I sat in the living room, watching the monitor connected to the security system, waiting. And then it happened. Evelyn's car pulled into the driveway, followed by Chloe and, to my surprise, David. I had expected him to stay away, but there he was. Helping them. Again. They walked up to the door, and I could feel my pulse quicken. This was it. The moment I had been preparing for. They were about to make their move, and I was going to catch them red-handed. The door opened, and they stepped inside, just as I had predicted. Evelyn immediately began barking orders, telling David to check the study, Chloe to look through the bookshelves, and herself to inspect the safe. My hands shook as I hit record on my phone, the footage capturing their every move. David was still hesitant, his movements jerky, but he was too deep in it now. He couldn't back out. And Evelyn was in her element. She was the queen of this little kingdom, and she was going to take everything she thought was hers. But what they didn't know was that this time, the game had changed. I had the upper hand. And I wasn't going to let them get away with it. As I watched them tear through my home, my mind raced. What if they found the real letters? What if they found something I didn't want them to? But then I reminded myself, this wasn't about the letters anymore. This was about making them pay for everything they had done to me. I waited until they were deep into their search before I made my move. Stepping into the hallway, I pressed the button on my phone to alert Michael. It was time. I wasn't just going to catch them. I was going to destroy everything they had built. And when the dust settled, I would be standing tall, free from their manipulation. Free from their control. This was my fight, and I was going to win. The minutes felt like hours as I watched them systematically tear apart my home, searching for something, anything, that could give them the upper hand. My hands were steady now, the adrenaline flowing through my veins, pushing me to keep my cool, to wait for the right moment. They had no idea what was coming. They thought they had me cornered. They thought I was the one on the defensive, the one with everything to lose. But as the footage from my cameras rolled, I realized something crucial. I wasn't the one who was trapped anymore. I kept my eyes on the monitor, watching David fumble through the drawers in the study, Chloe carelessly flipping through the bookshelves. But it was Evelyn that had me watching every movement, her eyes sharp, calculating. She was the mastermind behind all of this. I knew it. But she was also overconfident, and that's where she would make her mistake. They had been in the house for an hour, and I could see the frustration starting to mount. Evelyn had made her way to the living room, a perfect spot for her to claim victory when she found what she was looking for. It was clear to me now that this wasn't just about old letters or family property, it was about her ego, her need to control everything, even my life. She had never been able to accept the fact that I wasn't going to bow to her. That I had my own life, my own values. And she hated it. But in doing so, she had underestimated just how far I would go to protect what was mine. David's voice crackled through the monitor, faint but clear. Mom, I'm not sure, maybe we should wait until Sarah gets home. I don't know if. No, Evelyn snapped, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. You're just being soft. I've told you 1,000 times, if you don't stand up for what's yours, you'll lose it. You'll lose her too, just like you've lost everything else. Her words struck me like a punch in the gut. She was still trying to manipulate him. She was still trying to twist the knife and make him feel guilty for wanting to stand by me. But it wasn't going to work anymore. David was weak, yes, but he wasn't a child. He had made his choices, and now he had to face the consequences. As Evelyn's words echoed in my ears, I knew it was time. Michael's voice rang in my head, when they're cornered, they're dangerous. But I wasn't scared. I was ready. I had spent too long letting them dictate my life, my happiness. It was time to take control, to make sure they knew that I would no longer be their victim. I grabbed my phone and hit send. Within seconds, Michael's voice came through loud and clear. "It's time, Sarah. They've made their move. I've got everything set up on my end. Are you ready?" I didn't answer with words. I simply nodded, even though I knew he couldn't see me. This was it. This was the moment I had been preparing for. I walked down the hallway, my footsteps silent but steady. They didn't hear me approaching, at least, not until I turned the corner into the living room and saw the look on Evelyn's face as she turned, startled, her eyes widening. Chloe froze. David stood up from the bookshelf, his face pale, his hand still lingering on a book he had been pretending to search through. The tension in the room thickened, and for the first time I felt no fear. I was in control. Evelyn recovered quickly, the mask of politeness slipping back into place like she had rehearsed it 1,000 times. "Sarah, darling," she cooed, her voice smooth and saccharine. "I didn't realize you'd be back so soon. We were just having a little chat, looking for some old things, family photos, nothing more." I didn't even flinch at her words. I had already heard enough lies from her to last a lifetime. "Don't lie to me, Evelyn," I said, my voice firm and cold. "I know exactly what you're looking for. And you're not going to find it." Her eyes narrowed slightly, the faintest trace of a smirk playing at the corner of her lips. "And what exactly do you think you're going to do about it?" I walked closer, stopping just a few feet away from her, my gaze never wavering. "You're done, Evelyn. This charade ends tonight." David took a hesitant step forward, but I could see the indecision in his eyes. I didn't give him a chance to speak. "You've always chosen her, haven't you, David? Always picked your mother over your wife. And now, you're going to see just how much that's cost you." The words hung in the air, cutting through the tension like a blade. David opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. He looked like he was caught between two worlds, one where he could still try to save whatever was left of his relationship with me, and one where he had to face the truth about his mother and what she had done to us. But there was no saving us now. Not with the way things had unfolded. Evelyn's smirk faltered, just for a moment, but it was enough. She knew. She knew I was serious. I pulled out my phone and hit a button. The recording light on my security cameras flickered on, and in that moment, I saw the change in Evelyn's expression. She knew I had everything on tape. She knew her little game had come to an end. "You've been caught," I said, the finality in my voice making the air feel colder. "All of it, the lies, the manipulation, the secrets. It's over." Chloe's eyes widened in shock as she took a step back, looking at her mother, then at me. "Mom. What's going on?" Evelyn's perfect facade cracked. She looked at me, and for the first time I saw a flicker of panic. "You don't understand. This is, for your own good. All of it was to protect you. To protect our family." I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "Protect me? By tearing apart my life? By stealing what was mine? That's your version of protection?" David was still standing there, silent, his face a picture of helplessness. Evelyn turned to him, her eyes pleading. "David, tell her. Tell her I'm doing this for us. For you." But David finally spoke, his voice shaky, barely above a whisper. I don't know anymore, Mom. Maybe I've been wrong." It was the first time I had ever heard him admit it. And as much as I hated what had come to this, a small part of me felt something stir, a faint trace of hope. Maybe, just maybe, David was finally starting to see what had been in front of him all along. But there was no time for sentiment now. I had to finish what I started. "You're going to pay for what you did, Evelyn," I said, taking a step back toward the door. "But I'm not the one who will make you pay. You'll have to answer for this to someone else." Evelyn opened her mouth to protest, but I was already walking away. I didn't look back as I walked out the door. I didn't need to. I had already won. The game had changed. And this time I was the one in control. As I walked away from Evelyn's house, my heart pounded in my chest, but this time it wasn't fear. It was a strange, exhilarating sense of liberation. I had stepped into their world, and I had flipped it upside down. Evelyn thought she could control everything, everyone, but I had shown her just how wrong she was. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their manipulation. I had everything I needed to take control of my own life. The drive back to my apartment was a blur, my mind racing with the adrenaline of what had just happened. I hadn't expected it to feel this satisfying. I had always been the one to hold my tongue, to keep the peace, but no more. I was done playing the role of the quiet, submissive wife. I wasn't going to let them tear me down any longer. I pulled into the parking lot of my building, and for the first time in days, I felt a sense of calm settle over me. I had done what needed to be done, and now, the rest was out of my hands. As I walked up the stairs to my apartment, I couldn't help but think about what had just happened. I had exposed the truth. Evelyn's lies, her manipulations, they were all out in the open. And David, well, David would have to face the consequences of his actions. He had made his choice, and it had cost him everything. Inside my apartment, I dropped my keys on the counter and took a deep breath. The apartment was quiet, but it wasn't the same suffocating silence I had felt earlier. It was peaceful. Freeing. I went to the window and looked out at the city below. The lights twinkled in the distance, and for the first time I felt like I could breathe. Like I could finally move forward. But the reality of what had just transpired was starting to sink in. I had set everything in motion, but now, there would be consequences. The police would be involved. Evelyn's actions were far from harmless, and I knew that once they saw the footage, once they heard the truth, she wouldn't be able to escape it. I was ready for the fight. I had to be. I wasn't going to let her ruin my life any longer. My phone buzzed, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was a message from Michael, everything set on my end. The footage has been handed over. Evelyn and her crew won't get away with this. I let out a long, steady breath. This was really happening. I had done it. I had taken the first step in breaking free from the shackles of a life that had never really been mine to begin with. I walked to my desk and sat down, staring at the blank screen in front of me. My hand hovered over the keyboard, but I couldn't bring myself to type. I didn't need to. I had already done the hardest part. The truth was out, and it would be heard. Evelyn couldn't hide behind her charm, couldn't manipulate anyone else into believing her lies. The world would finally see who she truly was. But there was one thing left to do. I pulled out the papers from the drawer, divorce papers. I hadn't wanted it to come to this, but I knew it was inevitable. As much as I had loved David once, I couldn't keep living in a lie. I couldn't keep pretending that we had a future together when he had shown me, time and time again, that his loyalty was to his mother, not to me. I signed the papers with a steady hand, feeling the weight of that decision settle deep in my chest. It wasn't easy. It wasn't what I had wanted. But it was what I needed. I slipped the papers into an envelope, sealed it, and sat back in my chair, looking at the clock on the wall. It was time. Time to let go. Time to move on. The doorbell rang, and my heart skipped a beat. I wasn't expecting anyone. I stood up, walking toward the door, my mind racing. Who could it be? Was it David? I hadn't heard from him since I left his mother's house. As I opened the door, I found myself face to face with Michael, holding a manila envelope in his hands. "What's this?" I asked, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. "It's the final piece of the puzzle," Michael said, his voice calm but firm. I got a hold of something important. Something Evelyn doesn't want you to know. I took the envelope from him, my hands trembling slightly as I opened it. Inside was a small stack of papers, documents, photos, and a letter. As I sifted through them, my breath caught in my throat. These weren't just any documents. These were proof of Evelyn's financial misconduct, proof that she had been siphoning money from her own charity for years. She had built her empire on lies, on manipulation, and now, I held the evidence of it all in my hands. Michael, my voice trailed off as I looked up at him, my mind racing. How did you get this? Let's just say I have some connections. And Evelyn has made more enemies than she realizes. I stared at the papers in disbelief. This was it, the final nail in her coffin. The truth would be exposed. She couldn't escape this. Not now, not ever. I looked back at Michael, my eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and determination. We're going to make sure she pays for what she's done. We will, Michael said, his voice resolute. But remember, Sarah, the hardest part is over. You've already won. Now, you just have to let everything fall into place. I nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. I had already taken back control of my life. And now, I would watch as everything I had fought for came to fruition. Evelyn would be held accountable for her actions, and David, well, David would have to live with the choices he had made. As Michael left, I closed the door behind him and sat down, the weight of the divorce papers and the evidence pressing down on me. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could finally breathe. I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't hiding. I was free. And for the first time in years, I felt truly alive. The next chapter of my life was beginning, and this time, I was the one writing it.